globalization and then find ourselves in a situation of destruction of the basement on which they had built global economic relations. And destroying those pillars by their own hands, not by terrorists. Now the situation in international security that has come to a very dangerous point due to a complex set of interrelated factors. The end of operation of the latest strategic arms limitation treaty, and there is a whole range of acute international issues that need to be discussed. In terms of thematic content, the Munich conference, it's just very weak, and it is losing to such forums as the Sorobani-Yas forum in the UAE, the entire diplomatic forum held in Turkey, the Doha forum organized in Qatar. It's losing to those platforms. And I would like to also mention the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum that has become a universal platform where really global problems are discussed, as well as the Eastern Economic Forum and, of course, the Valdai Discussion Club Conference. So issues are discussed that are just in accordance with the current situation. And what we have witnessed during the recent Munich Security Conference, this situation testifies of the lack of the desire to see the reality. During the pandemics, they just were discussing how to put obstacles to the development of China and Russia, but people suffered from COVID-19. It was not studied enough back then. But the security, they were trying to discuss it somehow without any connection to the situation on the planet. So it's the lack of a desire or just strong desire to ignore the reality. It leads to self-destruction, what they are doing or what they were doing at the Munich conference this year. Let me quote one example. We will come back to the Munich conference, how they ignore this reality. Just have a look. At the end of February this year, the annual report by Norwegian Special Services, Intelligence Services was presented, and counterintelligence of Norway. It has a lot of groundless accusations of our country, accusations of creating a whole range of threats. This time it's no exception. It's just one of the bricks of that road on which the Western community is walking, just refusing to admit the actual situation. According to those intelligence services, Russia is a source of immediate risks for Norway, European security, and the Western world order, as they put it. And during the Munich conference, also attended by Norway, they stated that their world order, rules-based world order, it does not exist. It just collapsed or was not built because everything was given to the Kiev regime as assistance. And how is Russia accused of being a threat to Western world order? And them simultaneously stating that they have not succeeded in building that world order. So any reaction to just actual threats, there is no such reaction. For example, environmental threats, it's lacking. Notably, they mention the interests of Russia and China in weakening the transatlantic alliance amid the disagreements over Greenland. So, how are Russia and China engaged here in the context of Greenland and this transatlantic alliance of Russia and China? How did Russia and China influence the crisis situation in transatlantics? What have we done? We were not engaged in that. It's their problems. They created them themselves. They have a lot of claims, accusations against each other, stated directly or indirectly. So it's just ignoring the actual facts in favor of current situational interests. It's about Greenland, Ukrainian conflict, and the Nord Stream pipeline terror attacks. So it's they are not interested in actual facts and figures. It's just narratives about the rules-based world order. They are starting to forget about that and to abandon this meme, but other issues are still alive and on the agenda. It's just about Russia. They mention Russia's activities in different spheres of activity. The work of our embassy in Oslo, scientific vessels and fishing vessels, there are insinuations that there is the influence of the Kremlin everywhere. They have such illusions. Sanctions against the Russian fishing companies, Norebo and Murmansk Seafood, under the pretext of their involvement in intelligence activities. Those sanctions are absurd. What else have they invented? What other ideas are in the offing? So Oslo's actions are not in accordance with the long-term interests of either Russia or Norway, and their centricity. It does not have any relation to the reality. The use of some illusory narratives and the texts they are based on, and then they find themselves in the place that according to the NATO drills in the Baltic states, the Brussels military chiefs mentioned. And in this report, there are statements about the engagement of Russia. It's a very popular instrument of manipulation and intimidation of the population in Norway in order to justify their own problems or militaristic expenses, taxes, and expanding the powers of the intelligence agencies. So that's they are talking about it because they have been ordered by some of their curators or so-called allies in that transatlantic link. They just invent those statements that Russia makes them, knows about Russia and China. So that's how the distorted reality is created, with just illusionary threats, with aggressive plans that do not exist. So this illusionary picture is just stuck to the walls of the Munich conference on the issues of policy, security policy, in order for it to be more comfortable to state the end of the world order, the world order that is based on the non-existent rules. They just need to appeal to the issue of Russophobia in order to explain on the failures and the lack of logics in their actions. And now, at this moment, the Munich conference has become a parade of such ideas and tactics. And in the context of the issue of Norway and Arctic, we are against the escalation in the Arctic region and the preservation of this region as a space for international cooperation and peace. You know, we will come back to the issue of Munich. I would like to say a few words about the Arctic. There are a lot of statements about that, a lot of articles, comments, and our colleagues that just make confrontational statements. This region is used in their narratives as a conflict potential zone. Our counterparts, it's their habit already to justify nearly any actions by Russia, to qualify them as threats. So once again, in the context of what we have mentioned now, the reports of Norway intelligence services, the comments we have made, because the alleged Russian threat in the Arctic has been mentioned on many occasions in recent days. As a major Arctic power, Russia is interested in maintaining stability and peace in the Arctic region. This aim is enshrined in the concept of the foreign policy of the Russian Federation and other framework documents. It's our priority, despite any oscillations in the political situation. We are ready to maintain dialogue with everyone who is ready for constructive interaction in the Arctic region and to resolve the issues in the polar region. The cooperation with foreign states that is developed in the Arctic is not against any other states.
Its target is the sustainable economic development, the improvement of life of the North, and concerns about the indigenous peoples. All those who are interested in the Arctic are referred to experts rather than just fan lovers. They are aware of the fact that the attempts to blame Russia for this is unbiased. The development of the Arctic region is our legitimate right. The Russian infrastructure beyond the polar circle, including the military one, has long existed consistent with the current environment and plays an important role for defense and other purposes. We see that the bloc-associated discipline, or major, in fact, it's the command and administration of the NATO, and I refer to all our NATO states, continue to build up its military presence, engaging the armed forces from extra-regional countries. Many drills are being taken, including against the false actor, and we know that it is Russia. So I think that the one who is to blame for all these actions are the Europeans and the Western countries themselves. And I believe that it has nothing to do with Russia and China. It's not just a geographic part of Russia, but an integral part of the cultural identity of our citizens. It's a home to indigenous peoples of Russia who explored the polar circle region, and very soon we will have another occasion to remember about that. We celebrate the Arctic Day on the 28th of February. Russia supports the development of Arctic region, concerns about the well-being of its citizens and the environment. So any attempts to impede that process are doomed to a failure. And let me continue the Munich topic, if you don't mind, because out of the pocket we are now witnessing debates on the Navalny case. Although it seems that there is an international mechanism. This is both bilateral cooperation and law enforcement authorities and international organizations who for all these years have been exploring and studying and analyzing the same cases, trying to find some information. But they don't need it because there is the Munich conference, security conference, which is used for that purposes. We've seen a lot, but still raise our eyebrows. With the Skripal's cases and the same stories on the Navalny poisoning on the 16th of February, the court, which deals with the facts and chemical formulas, the whole world has seen another anti-Russia narrative about the case of Navalny, who was accused of fraudster and then blamed for the spread of terrorism, in addition to insinuations and allegations of the so-called poisoning by the Novichok poison. 2 years after, we are facing another accusation, but this time of the poison, of the frog poison. To all those who is not following the Skripal case, I think this would sound weird and awkward. Because it's unbelievable that the serious experts would publicly flare up tensions in order to draw attention to the Munich conference. But let me remind you that there was the Skripal's code, there were lies. There was a lot of evidence near the lake where the Skripals was sitting. And so it's all one and the same story. This is the invention of the information agenda with such bright traps to attract attention of just the common citizens. They are referring to some chemicals, formulas, labs, analysis, OPCW. It's all this is the concern of the experts. And the Western countries are right now trying to engage all other common people. And it's simple here. The authors of these scenarios, yet 2 of them, bet on triggering another primitive anti-Russian narrative in order to flare up the anti-Russian narrative at the Munich conference. But their fantasies and their delirious mind conceal a history-long experience of the British colonizers. And this expels just surprise. And we need to offer a plausible explanation. But right now we see that this Russophobic campaign is beyond any reason. And we have already mentioned it during this briefing. We hope that these states, the request of the OPCW, will be responded in an adequate manner. Let me recall you that the Russian Federation for many years has been waiting for the response from the UK on the outstanding issues on the Skripal's cases. For example, in September 2018, Foreign Office informed our embassy about the denial of our request submitted by the Prosecutor General's office, request for legal assistance. And since the provocation, and that's how we view it, Salisbury provocation, the embassy of the Russian Federation in London sent over 60 diplomatic notes to the Home Ministry of the UK. 60 requests have been sent. And I cited you the figures that are based not on the comments or briefings or some messages or social posts. These are official requests to the Home Office of the United Kingdom to submit any information on this regard. So these are requests, I would call them so, because they were very substantial documents. We showed our intention to cooperate and engage on this topic. Many of the questions we raised have not been responded yet. On some points we were just brushed off. The same situation with the previous scenario with Mr. Navalny. Our numerous requests to the countries complicit of this provocation, as well as the technical secretariat of the OPWC, sent by the Prosecutor Generals and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia under Article 9 of the PCW, and they were submitted under the legal assistance request under the European Convention 1959. They were not responded, all of them. Likewise, the principal question on whereabouts and how, beyond the territory of Russia, the biomaterials of Navalny ended up in having the traces of the substance found by the German chemists, unknown specialists from France, Sweden, which were studied by two relevant labs selected by the OPWC Technical Secretariat, whose flag is concealed. And I wonder, and I think the whole world is wondering, because we're hearing a lot of things about this case, questions to the answers to the original questions. But that's not the case. Now these are frogs who help the West. As of today, the Skripal's cases and other allegations, the Russian Federation and its permanent mission in UK, Germany, France, Sweden, as well as the Prosecutor General's Office of Russia, submitted the requests to the above-mentioned countries as well as to the Technical Secretariat, submitted over 100 diplomatic missions, official requests, and other requests. And there is no wonder that we have not received any answers yet. Instead, the fever-mind cheerleaders continue to make new horror movies about anti-Russia policy in order to nurture these sentiments in the countries. And I wonder, and I can cite the Epstein files with the horrible crimes, and they concealed it. I know that they have a well-made and invented story of the Skripal's cases and the tool they used to use. Right now, it's about frogs. And shortly after the announcement of these allegations, as for the reasons of death, the French made other remarks. And I think that's because there are frogs that are connected with this case. The Foreign Minister of France, Mr. Barrot, went even beyond, claiming that our country is ready to use bacteriological weapon warfare against its own population. And I think they are not aware of what is happening inside the country. Here, they all the time claim that it's bacteriological weapon. And let me remind you that before that, they referred to chemical weapons. And right now, it's bacteriological warfare. If you don't mind, I'll answer to all these messages in the social media. I think the top officials of France. The French foreign minister must be recalled the story of his own country. The case of poisons has become the most outrageous and high-profile cases of the Louis the XIV. Back then, a network of fraudsters was acting at that time who supplied poison to rich women who wanted to kill their own relatives or husbands. And we know how such ladies in Paris act against their own husbands. These poisons back then was called as the substance of heirs because they were used in order to get money and the heritage. A special chamber and court was even established to investigate into such cases. Dozens of people were blamed for that and sentenced to death about 400 people, including a famous lady, one famous lady in France. It became a tool to fight and led to the hysteria. And Louis XIV ordered to destroy all the documents with poisons. 150 years later, France has witnessed a process which has become very famous. In 1840, a young woman, Marie Capet-Lafarge, was blamed for poisoning her husband with another substance. The story was internationally known. Why? Because the process was written all across the world. Why? Because for the first time in toxicology, it was the main instrument of the testament. The defense argued the analysis, and this case has become a milestone in forensics, medical forensics, and that was the start point of the scientific base proving the poisoning. Tell me, please, and I wonder, if in 1940 in Central Europe, and particularly in France, this method of scientific evidence was chosen, we can remember it right now and wonder, where are these formulas? So just a common person makes his blood test, providing material with a stamp, all the relevant documents, on the medical documents with all the names on it. I wonder, what's the point here? It has nothing to do with all those frogs poisoning. Because no official organization or lab can write such things, but even back then in Central Europe, this methodology was used, and I refer to these attitudes towards investigation. I think they should recall it. Likewise, the classical writers, since we've started to memorialize the Skripal's cases. And let me cite you French writers, great French writers, for example, Alexandre Dumas, who invented the image, a demonizing image of Catherine de' Medici. And he knew what he was doing. In this novel, the poison becomes a tool of big policy, and Dumas describes this in detail, brilliantly. Let me recall you that there is a notion of Charles IX, and let me stress this, it's a fiction. But reflects. René, listen to me. You poisoned with your gloves the Queen Navarskaya. You poisoned with the smoke of the lamp the Prince Parsin. You tried to poison with the apple Prince Condé. And these are quotes from the novels of Dumas. But the well-known doctor, he's not a writer but a doctor, the doctor Ambroise Paré viewed that all the perfume, gloves, and jewelry and cosmetics made by the royal masters had poison in them. And historian records believe that she was the one to blame for the killing of Henrik IV, who was offered poisoned gloves. So, when next time the French Foreign Ministry wants to talk about poisoning, I think they'd better start about their own history, the history of France. And right now we will switch to the situation in Ukraine.
Recently, it has been 12 years since the tragic events whose main point was the anti-constitutional coup d'etat in Kiev. Under the mottos of democracy, their favorite mottos, freedom of speech and fighting corruption, of course, and the promises of a bright European future. The crowd of strongmen, of militants, radicals, puppets of Western political elite. This crowd of radicals manipulated by the West has replaced the legal authorities. And what was the end of that, and what is the continuation? I think I do not need to repeat that. We see that every day. It led to just rampant nationalism and ignoring human rights, fighting Russian language and history, deterioration of economic situation, and the collapse of social institutions in Ukraine as such. The consequences of the political crisis that started back then could have been not so hard. There was a chance, and it was given by the document signed in 2014 with the mediatorship of Germany, France, and Poland of the agreement that envisaged constitutional reform and immediate presidential elections. Its implementation could have provided, and nearly all the political experts say that, could have avoided those tragic events. But the idea of those mediators, it was different. And the winners of Euromaidan, it was just an unneeded obstacles to the ruling positions, financial flows, material resources. It was just connivance of Western guarantors of the agreement. The US, the EU, they just did not even try to correct those opposition figures and to demand the observance of their commitment. They just hurried up to state the change of power in Ukraine and started to promote that anti-Russian beastly, those beastly actions, Russophobic policy stimulated, and they started, instead of taking into account historical peculiarities, ethnocultural peculiarities of Ukraine, started to construct the ethnocratic state, not for everyone. Just remember the Euromaidan motto: Ukraine will become Ukrainian and humanless, with no people. And Tymoshenko just called upon shooting from nuclear weapons. The Russians and Russian-speaking citizens residing in Ukraine. It's just okay for the political, so to say, reality situation of another experiment field for the Westerners. For the development of the situation is well known. Those who protected the constitution, who did not accept the coup d'etat, they were accused of being traitors to the interests of Maidan. Because it's obvious that the interests of Maidan are not the interests of the people of Ukraine. Moreover, they were declared terrorists. Just imagine those people who said they have elected the authorities, did it legally, they voted, and they had the constitution that was not cancelled by anyone, regional laws. They were named terrorists. And those who are now killing civilians, killing them by Ukrainian army drones, and attacking with Lepistok mines that maim children, and then killing doctors who are trying to help civilians, women and children, and continue to send drones of the Ukrainian army. They do not call them terrorists. They do not call terrorists those who caused explosions of Nord Stream, who shoot at oil reservoirs and the oil pipelines. They do not call terrorists those who destroy hospitals and schools. No. National radicals just started back then to mercilessly exterminate the population of Ukraine. Because they are talking about anti-constitutional actions in Ukraine. Because those people, they stood for the preservation of the constitutional order. It was the native population, and there was another meeting of the contact group within the Ramstein format for defense cooperation with Ukraine under the chairmanship of Germany. It was just false accusation against our country for this catastrophic situation of the civilians in Ukraine, and supporting those Ukrainian army soldiers who kill civilians, just facilitating terror attacks against civilians. The Pentagon had ignored that meeting again, but it was the first event for new Ukrainian Defense Minister Fedorov, who provided a long list for the supplies of long-range missiles, different munitions, and so on. As a result, the Europeans, despite the exhaustion of their own stockpiles of weapons and poor economic figures, offered military aid of $35 billion to Ukraine. The main sponsors of Ukraine are Germany, Norway, $7 billion. And they needed those reports against Russia for that. Sweden, that will pay 3.7 billion euro, Britain 3 billion British pounds. It's a modest support in comparison with Sweden and Norway. Denmark as well, among the leaders of military supplies to Ukraine. They just bore the burden of more than 24 billion euro from 29 billion euro. It's just investing into the slaughter. They're not worried about the Kiev regime not being able to win on the battlefield. In this hybrid war unleashed by themselves, because it's just an instrument. And the purposes of the Kiev regime itself are not able just to steal, to kill. It's not of interest to them. The aggressive purposes of Rammstein and similar gathering, it was stated by Rutte. He said that the support to Ukraine should go on despite the peaceful negotiations, and the alliance believes that it is necessary to further strengthen the Ukrainian army military potential in order to put obstacles to Russia. And now let us remember, back then they demanded a ceasefire. The Westerners requested a ceasefire from Russia, and now they are talking about supplying weapons to the Kiev regime despite peaceful negotiations. They just aim to continue the slaughter, the hybrid war, and someone steals, someone just enjoys the killing, someone just explaining to their own voters why it is the case and why those problems have appeared. So it's NATO Munich Security Conference. I will just not provide more details because I think it's already clear. But former Western politicians, they highlighted that the militarization of Ukraine and the EU will continue despite the dynamics of the settlement. So the question is, what about the settlement if despite its progress and dynamics, the slaughter will continue with even more zeal, as we understand now from their aspirations. And now we see who wants peace and who does not want that, who's never wanted it. And that confirms the lack of interest of the British EU war party to search for the end to this conflict. So it's just beastly statements by Zelensky himself. He thanked the EU members for the so-called military credit of 90 billion euros, and he called upon them to continue their actions to supply funds to the Ukrainian army and weapons, and he said that he will not take into account any losses. Just imagine his election program, if he is to participate in elections, or will continue to implement this offer of the West despite any losses. So who will vote for him? At least one vote. So he does not need any elections just to swear allegiance before those allegiance until the last Ukrainian, before those who provide funds for him. And who needs to continue this bloody corruption scheme, taking into account that hundreds of billions of funds have been allocated these years, but a fact remains a fact. During the Munich conference, he mentioned his intention to monthly kill 50,000 Russians. It was just his insane ideas about NATO membership, requests from NATO and EU members, some 30, 50-year strong, and he said, security guarantees. He said that there will be no election and political settlement without the ceasefire. It's against the background of the statements by Europeans to which he had applauded. Despite the negotiations and settlement, they will not stop those hostilities, but he requested a ceasefire, so unilateral ceasefire. They hope that Russia will pause all that and observe the supplies of weapons, rearmament of the Kiev regime, and without taking into account its losses. So let them just search for fools themselves. Zelensky tried to focus on the his main target, combating Russia. It was a disagreement within the transatlantic partnership. German Chancellor Merz has mentioned that. He said that the transatlantic partnership, it's a quotation, no longer something that they can take for granted. The Germans can take for granted. He said it's a big abyss, end of quote. So this support is regarded by the Kiev regime as a carte blanche for terrorist crimes, military crimes. Before another negotiations round in Geneva that has now started, he intensified attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure of Russia. The sites of water supply, electricity supplies, and he does not conceal that. And this week, 147 civilians in Russia suffered from Ukrainian army actions. 21 people died. I will just quote the specific facts. In the Belgorod region on the 11th of February, there was a shell wound caused to a 14-year-old girl, and as a result of a missile strike in Belgorod, 2 employees were killed and several were wounded. 5 people also suffered. There were casualties in settlements, and children suffered. Due to HIMARS strikes, 2 people were killed and 3 were wounded. As a result of the attack of a drone against a civilian car, a civilian was killed. And on the 14th of February, there was a massive strike of enemy drones in the region. Many drones were destroyed, and an employee of a mobile company was wounded. a person engaged in reparation of the network. In the Donetsk People Republic, the settlement of Velikaya Lebetika, as a result of a drone strike, children were wounded, 9 and 10 years old. On the 13th of February, in Malakovka settlement, passenger cars were struck by drones and 14 people were wounded. One civilian was killed and 23 were wounded. Also, a 10-year-old girl, Volgograd region, a house was struck, a house of a big family with many children. A 12-year boy was wounded. The house was totally destroyed. So those killed, those wounded children, women and old men, old people, elderly people, did they participate in fighting, in hostilities? Were they just legal target of the servicemen? But they were the target of those who considers them a target for themselves, considers this target as legal terrorists. It's obvious violation of international humanitarian law, international terrorist acts, and international organizations keep silent about that. And the punishment of foreign mercenaries is just inevitable. 9,000, more than 9,000 cases have been initiated by Russian prosecution. His Russian volunteer corps, Vasily Kirishenko, he developed plans to invade and accusations are put against him. The commander of Marine Corps of the Ukrainian Army, Alexander Shevtsov, who ordered in 2024-2025 of unmanned vehicles, attacks in the Black Sea and private houses in Tuapse. He is on the international wanted list and sentenced to 14 years of imprisonment. Citizens of Finland, Sulka Koski-Konsti, and Japanese citizens Yuya Matamori, they are on the international wanted list. All the named fact confirms the relevance of the tasks of the denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine and the elimination of threats from its territory. The aims will be fulfilled, as repeatedly stated by Russian leaders. And the participation of mercenaries in the Ukrainian conflict, the cutting-edge weapons that are supplied to the Ukrainian armed forces, they can not be used by the Ukrainian soldiers who lack skills to use such weapons. It can be done only by foreign specialists like American HIMARS system, British French Storm Shadow system, and other weapons used for Kiev regime in order to strike our territory. Moreover, foreign councils are engaged in the development and intelligence operations with Western data and Western systems of targeting.
The foreign mercenaries fight on the side of Ukraine. They are being engaged for exploitation of the foreign planes. At first, The Hague supplied 24 old F-16 jet fighters. Right now, these are instructors, and I think next will be the hit pilots. So we see how they save their money because they don't need to pay for the disposal. And I think that's not the first case when the Dutch mercenaries are being engaged in a direct conflict with Russia. And let me remind you that the mercenaries are not covered by the international law, and they are not under the Geneva Convention. And we also would advise them to read the eyewitnesses' accounts. For example, the major Dutch newspaper Telegraph published on the 10th of January. This is the Dutch media. So Russia has nothing to do about the spread of false information. This was an interview given by a volunteer in the Netherlands, telling that every morning the Ukrainian army starts by not by photos and not by the anthem, but by the Nazi welcoming. He also told us that everything, all the wallpapers are with a swastika and Nazi signs. Along with the mercenaries in the Ukrainian army, there are drug traffickers. They are boasting of the photos with cut heads, with tortures. And I think The Hague doesn't bother it because it continues to fund Ukraine. And it's a shame for the complicity, because all the Dutch citizens are paying taxes in order to fund all these massacres and atrocities. So in this regard, let me recall that any foreign mercenaries, the so-called presented in Ukraine, who are participating in the hostilities against Russia, are becoming a legitimate military target, irrespective of their jurisdiction in Ukraine. I think they won't be given any mercy. And this interviewer, not in the mass media, as I've already mentioned, in the European mass media, in the NATO mass media, should become a morning prayer for them. And all this global environment has those who receive salaries, and I refer to international officials, who should have become a voice of reason. They should have become some wise men, advancing the knowledge and the truth on what is happening in Europe and how to settle it. They should at least try to do so, but one more time we can report that this is a publicly biased approach of the UN Secretariat, which communicates to the international community with violation of all charters and provisions of the UN, underpinned on the principles by the UN office. The Secretary General of the UN Secretary General concluded that in respect of Ukraine, the respect for territorial integrity prevails over self-determination. And we know that these principles are reflected in the Declaration of International Law adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1970, based on the consensus. Completely ignoring the provisions of this document and advancing alternative interpretation of Articles 1 and 2, the Secretary General abuses his powers. And moreover, he is acting against any settlement. And we are compelled to recall that the UN Secretary General is not entitled to interpret the principles of the UN Charter on behalf of the World Organization. Consistent with Article 97, the UN Secretary General is the principal administrative official And while his statements, the statements of Guterres, are beyond his administrative mandate, so we see a clear violation of Article 100, which states that Secretariat should keep the principles to neutrality, impartiality, and objectivity, and act for the benefit of all the state members. Loyalty to the principles and objectives of the United Nations, along with the provision on the personnel of the United Nations, is one of the main principal tasks and functions of all the official servants of the United Nations. Loyalty to the UN nations and to its principles, rather than to the state or group of states. Nevertheless, Mr. Guterres puts himself above his employees and above the member states. His statements are inconsistent with the principles, targets, and objectives of the United Nations, which are to settle and prevent conflicts, but hinder their implementation, compromising the authority of the United Nations. I think that these statements reflect some personal perspectives of the citizen of Portugal or the official policy of the government, rather than the position of an official of the United Nations. And once he is still the UN Secretary General, we would advise him to leave his own mind behind and behave professionally, consistent with the documents which regulate his mandate. Yet another topic. We mentioned the intentions of Tokyo to join the NATO mechanism of procuring military equipment for the Kiev regime. Although the Cabinet of Ministers denies any final deal, we believe that this decision is highly likely based on the stance by the Japanese government on the situation in Ukraine. We highlighted on previous occasions that inclusion of Tokyo to anti-Russia initiatives is not conducive to the settlement of the crisis. Moreover, it only flares up the conflict. The equipment that will be supplied with the Japanese money will become another legitimate target for the Russian army. Moreover, these actions will complicate the Russia-Japan relations, which have already been significantly cornered. Another topic, and I'm talking about Moldova. We've got a lot of questions, and taking into account that the Moldovan authorities continue to aggravate the situation. On February 13th, the President, Maia Sandu, at the 62nd Munich conference said that at the September parliamentary elections held in 2025, Russia was claiming that if the Moldovans do not vote for the pro-Russian forces, and then I quote, Moldova will follow the same example as Ukraine. And let's face the truth. Indeed, the situation in the country has become deteriorating since late 2020, when the anti-Russia party came to power. But Chisinau lives in a distorted reality, which follows a Russophobic policy which polarizes the society and undermines the sovereignty of the country. Let me cite a couple of examples. The government continues to play with the Kiev regime. On February 11th, the Parliamentary Commission on Foreign Policy and the Ever-Integration of Moldavia blessed the bilateral deals on reconsidering the agreement on military and technical cooperation with Ukraine. With whom? And guess whom? With Ukraine. This deal is of 1993. The Moldovan officials claim that this document provides for starters on exploration, cybersecurity, logistics, and current technologies, modern technologies. The Republic, there was an outrage in the Republic. People are wondering about the root causes of such actions. Such a revision of the legal framework with a state which is in conflict And it is highly likely that this agreement hides something. And the citizens are waking up to the idea that they don't know the truth about this. And this can become yet another step towards engaging Moldova into hostilities. The Orthodox Church is being discriminated as well in Moldova, which is being so widely practiced in Moldova. For over several weeks, the parishioners of the Orthodox Church in the Derineo settlement are trying to prevent its transfer to the Bessarab metropoly of the Romanian Orthodox Church. The media report that this decision on changing the jurisdiction of the Church was adopted by the Supreme Court of the Republic. Right now, many countries go to court not for settling a legal dispute concerning the property or some copyrights or property, but go to court in order to make the believers to change the religion or their beliefs, to divide and to rewrite and to change the cultural identity. I've heard and read historical accounts, but I believe that these times have already gone. But right now we're seeing the Human Rights Declaration. There are a lot of human rights organizations and religious freedoms right now. But nevertheless, it comes as that. By the way, many people are saying that this decision to change the jurisdiction of the Church was adopted by the Supreme Court of the Republic, and these signatures were forged. The Moldovan government continues to cancel the Russian culture, and the media reports that the textbook on Romanian, and this is the Moldovan language, and literature for the second grade, the novel on the fisherman and the fish, they claim that this was written not by Alexander Pushkin, but by Helena Gerber, the American citizen. And I'm speechless here. The government publicly glorifies the Romanian collaborators, and open sources claim that the school calendar contains the date of birth of the former Prime Minister of Romania of 1937 and 38. This Prime Minister, Ktevan Gogi, stripped off the citizenship of almost 25,000 Romanian Jews. And these anti-Russian narratives are being advanced by the Moldovan authorities, which impact the nation and the people of Moldova. So we mentioned religion and beliefs. Many countries have institutions which deal with and prepare reports on the rights of the believers, and there is such an institute in the United States as well. The administration draws significant attention to the Orthodox Church, and intensification of the church question is in line with the mobilization of the U.S., preventing to spread the neoliberal values which the Biden administration prolonged and advanced. Instead, they use the religion, they weaponize the religion. And the assessments with religion in various states released in the reports of the United States State Department and NGOs, the Commission on Religious Freedom, the Commission on Security in Europe, the International Alliance for the Freedom of Alliance, are very biased. And these reports on freedoms, religious freedoms, are distorted or completely ignored. The support of some ethnic groups in the Middle East comes along with cherry-picking criticism of those governments and the governments charged with discrimination of religious minorities. An illustrative example is the pressure exerted by the US on the Nigeria's government and whose efforts to fight religious intolerance were just ignored. As for Russia, the UN reports systematically charge Russia with violation of religious freedom, citing and referring to criminal prosecution of members of extremist organizations whose activity is banned, is unlawful and illegitimate in Russia. They also spread unjustified allegations on religious rights violations. But as for the crimes of the Kiev regime against the Russian Orthodox Church and the clergy, the international community has never heard of any response of Washington, while the Russian Federation questions on many occasions the religion question. And let me recall that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs published already 2 reports on illegal actions of the Kiev regime against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, published in 2023 and 25. The report on human rights in Ukraine in 2025 and persecutions on the believers have this whole section which cites specific facts and comments describing discriminatory laws of Ukraine against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, citing illegitimate actions of the Ukrainian special and intelligence services. They are citing forcible occupation of churches, intolerance and aggression, manifestation of intolerance and aggression against the clergy and the believers of the Orthodox Church. And I wish that the American authorities, likewise the relevant international agencies, paid attention to the sufferings of the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, proving that they are being abused. The fact that the Kiev regime funds de facto these large-scale religious persecutions in modern Europe. And this would become the most valuable contribution to Washington's efforts to protect the freedom of religion in the world. But they ignore the Christians and the Orthodox Church in Ukraine. Another topic, with artificial intelligence, in 2025, the United Nations established specialized platforms for artificial intelligence and international scientific panel. Over 30 candidates with the relevant expertise on AI wanted to join these agencies, and despite the efforts of some countries to hinder the process, the final list by the United Nations containing the Russian expert was adopted on February 12. We hope that this panel will hold depoliticized debates, that we hope for the meaningful and valuable contribution, that the scientific group would focus on the global dialogue and provide professional assessments, as well as initiatives aimed at strengthening the UN central role on artificial intelligence, bridging the digital divide of the states, as well as equal access and non-discriminatory access to the software. We appreciate the commitment, the consistent dedication of the UN Secretariat and UN Office on digital and new technologies, and we will continue to support this policy for the best solutions for the benefit of the humankind.
There have been some questions by a number of media outlets in order to assess the cooperation of Russia and Central Asian states. We have prepared the relevant comment. I would like to confirm that the Central Asian states are our closest neighbors, allies, and strategic partners. We are interested in stability, security, and prosperity of this region, increasing the economic, resource, and technological independence of all the states, preserving their cultural and national peculiarities. We respectfully treat the multi-vector foreign policy of our Central Asian friends, driven by their aspiration to expand mutually beneficial cooperation with all countries, primarily in terms of their domestic socio-economic development. They are aware that the damage caused by severing ties with Russia will not be compensated by anyone, however tempting the West's promises can be. So they are aimed at cooperation, and Russia is among the leaders of key trade partner in Central Asia. The total trade turnover for the first 9 months of 2025 amounted to approximately $35 billion. There is also no alternative to Russia in terms of ensuring security in the region, including through our military presence in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, countering the threats of international terrorism, Islamic radicalization, and drug trafficking. Apart from traditional bilateral contacts that are quite intense at the highest level and at high levels. On the 9th of October, the second Central Asia-Russia summit was held in Dushanbe. Now we are working on implementing the Joint Action Plan for 2025-2027, which includes sections such as trade and economy, energy, transport, healthcare, and sanitary and epidemiological welfare, cultural and humanitarian cooperation, ecology, migration. A small announcement: on the 21st of February, we mark the International Mother Language Day. It is marked internationally, established by the UNESCO General Conference in November 1999 to draw attention to the need to promote linguistic and cultural diversity. Our country has accumulated extensive language policy experience over many decades. It is in demand by our international partners. So Russian is studied in secondary schools, used as a language for education at universities, and minority languages are integrated into the Unicode system. According to the decree of the President of the Russian Federation last year, the Day of Languages of the Peoples of Russia was established. It will be celebrated on the 8th of September. And the International Decades of Indigenous Languages is held from
использования информационных технологий как инструмента продвижения языкового разнообразия. Вот в этом году запланирован, например, крупный тематические конференции в Ханты-Мансийске, Саранске, где ожидается участие экспертов из десятков стран. День родного языка дает повод упомянуть о таком, в общем, неприглядном явлении, как, или лучше даже сказать, позорном для современного мира, как попытка отмены русского языка и вообще всего русского в целом в ряде недружественных стран. Даже не дружественных стран, а рядом недружественных режимов. На сегодняшний день можно заявить об очевидном провале этой кампании. Русский язык стабильно остается в пятерке самых распространенных в мире, широко используется в качестве официального и рабочего языка на международных площадках, также является одним из немногих, сохраняющих статус глобального. На нем говорят на всех континентах. Он уверенно востребован в науке, культуре, дипломатии, ну, конечно, и в информационном пространстве. И яркое подтверждение этому проведенное в прошлом году в Москве 18-я ассамблея русского мира и участие в ней представителей из 105 стран. А вот эта безудержная, страшная, чудовищная русофобская кампания, напротив, выявила наличие у нашей страны огромного пула единомышленников, союзников и друзей. В мире здравомыслящих людей больше, и они искренне симпатизируют нашей стране, восхищаются достижениями в сфере культуры, науки, спорта, разделяют и те духовно-нравственные ценности, которые мы сформулировали для себя, а соответственно и общие цивилизационные духовно-нравственные ценности. Видим, в каких непростых условиях им зачастую приходится действовать. Это беспрецедентное давление, и спецслужб, это и репрессии в отношении русскоязычных граждан, это аресты и другие методы воздействия. Несмотря на все это, они продолжают работу по популяризации русского языка, популяризации и распространению русской культуры, не боятся поддерживать контакты со своими российскими визави. Ежегодно отмечаемые по всему миру День русского языка и День славянской письменности и культуры с каждым годом сопровождаются все более массовыми мероприятиями. К нашим посольствам и русским домам все чаще присоединяются организации российских соотечественников, представители академического сообщества, другие ценители русской словесности. Такие мероприятия проводятся и на площадках международных организаций, ну, например, ООН, ЮНЕСКО, в том числе совместно с представителями других и с представителями и с представительствами других государств-участников СНГ. Нельзя не отметить, с каким триумфом в прошлом году прошли гастроли академического ансамбля песни и пляски российской армии имени Александрова в Республике Гватемала, Республике Коста-Рика, Республике Парагвай, Объединенных Арабских Эмиратах, Республике Зимбабве, Республике Мадагаскар. Очевидно, что многочисленные зрители концертов и спектаклей российских музыкальных, театральных коллективов, выступающих в самых разных уголках планеты, про то, что они должны отменить все русское, ничего не знали. Ну, а многие просто посмеялись, когда услышали о том, что якобы нас где-то отменяют. Российская культура была, есть и будет. Богатая, самобытная, составляющая неотъемлемую часть культуры мировой, вообще мировой цивилизации. У нее колоссальный потенциал. Это важнейшая часть образа нашей страны, которая способна работать на укрепление международного авторитета нашей страны и, самое главное, на оздоровление международных отношений, формирование объективного представления как о нас, жителях России, так и на нейтрализацию антироссийских настроений и политико-идеологического происхождения за рубежом. Да, это не всем нравится, но будут терпеть, потому что деструктивная логика и вот эта агрессивная националистическая идеология будут попраны. И когда стало ясно, как вы, наверное, уже видели, что отменить русский язык и культуру не получится, западные политтехнологи принялись усердно работать над тем, чтобы отделить их от России как государства. Дошло до этого. Якобы, ну, с их точки зрения, или то, как они это запаковывают в свои так называемые нарративы, русский язык и культура принадлежат не нам. Нет, как они говорят, а якобы вообще всем, и как бы мы к этому в общем, особого отношения не имеем. Я чего только на этот счет не читала. Типа, мол, отделите, они предлагают всему миру русскую культуру, российскую культуру, русский язык от Российской Федерации, как бы, ну, раз не получилось у них отменить, а Российскую Федерацию как бы нужно всячески с их точки зрения наказывать, пессимизировать, отменять и так далее. Ну, я даже не знаю, как это назвать. Безумным, нелепым, глупым, наверное, все вместе. И все это, конечно, обречено на очередной провал. Так что будем и дальше беречь и защищать нашу родную речь, нашу культуру, наш язык. При этом мы не жадные, мы, наоборот, готовы всех и учить, и приобщать, и делиться всеми нашими, в этом смысле, богатствами. И я готова ответить на ваши вопросы. С нами ли журнал «Международная жизнь»?
Да, Мария Владимировна, добрый день. Хотелось бы услышать ваш комментарий относительно недавней публикации корпорации BBC. В конце января этого года она вышла в свет. Так вот, в этой публикации говорится о том, что согласно некой утечке Россия использует список Интерпола для разыскиваемых лиц, чтобы преследовать критиков за рубежом. Вот как бы вы такую публикацию могли прокомментировать?
Ну
Спасибо.
это, к сожалению, BBC этим страдает, я имею в виду дезинформацией. Вот это очередной пример того, как этот британский телеканал, кстати говоря, государственный, распространяет дезу, обвиняя Россию в неких злоупотреблениях каналами международных организаций, в частности, Международной организации уголовной полиции, ну, то, что мы с вами знаем как Интерпол. Давайте посмотрим на реальность. Я, кстати говоря, видела и эти сообщения, и BBC, и до этого читала нечто аналогичное. И самое главное, почему, с чего они и когда они начинают заниматься подобными вбросами. Мы видели подобное не раз, поэтому уже поняли их систему. Вот, например, в 2018 году это же издание,
that the Kiev regime has collected for the future. It will be a burden for the EU. However, the EU heads persistently conduct Ukraine along this way, the Euro integration way, whose purpose is allegedly Euro integration, and it is done just for their political ambitions, to satisfy them, without taking into account the real situation, just to engage, not integrate completely, but to do it halfway. It's needed for their political situational interests.
The European countries and capitals are aware that Ukraine is not ready to join EU, irrespective of the efforts of the Europeans to engage Ukraine into EU. But the current situation in Ukraine, and I would like to enlist, these are the human rights, which are the core interest of the EU: corruption, the overall corruption, economic sustainability. These are the topics in Ukraine that are inconsistent with the standards to join the EU. While the Ukraine integration have nothing to do with integration of the Balkan states, who have been waiting for their membership for decades. They've done loads of work in order to join EU. But nevertheless, they are falling short. As for the expansion of the EU policy, the Brussels actions is just the EU policy tactics towards other countries, candidates, who are first being attracted on the some prospects, good prospects, without any promises, demanding obedience in a wide range of issues of internal and external policy, and all these instructions do not ensure anything. It has nothing to do about accession or integration. It's just about bringing into the sphere of dominance, economic dominance of Europe over the candidates, which is now, and I've mentioned, is becoming a military alliance. And secondly, leads to disruption of ties between the candidates with the other states of the world. And my second question, the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said that the government should accelerate its pace and this expenses and costs for defense, whether there are any risks for further destabilization. We view these statements by the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer as a response to the sophisticated internal situation in the country. Amid these negative processes, this is the influx of illegal migrants, obsolete infrastructure, increased income, tax burden, as well as scandals on the family of Keir Starmer. The leader of Labourist Party is making everything possible to raise his rating of popularity among his colleagues. So this increase of funding of the military sector, it's just his ambitions. And behind this are the military capacities that want to gain money, to make profits. Such a destructive activity of the UK authorities is being well mentioned by Our country makes conclusions, chooses the tactics and on how to deal with these countries, and it's not and the content of such tools are not publicly available, and you quite know about this. And of course, let me recall you one quotation of our president stated at the end of 2025, and I quote, "Russia is not going to fight Europe, but if Europe wants to have a fight with us and starts to do so, we're ready to do it right now." End of quote. And please, don't try to misinterpret or distort the meaning. But the sense is quite clear. We're trying to settle peace, to achieve peace. But if they want a war, we can have a war with them. The US establishment prioritizes their own interests, who want to increase the military spendings. Thank you. Is Sputnik Armenia with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have one question today. The Armenian authorities said that the country is losing competitiveness in terms of railroad infrastructure because the administration is being governed by the Russian company. Then the Prime Minister, Mr. Pashinyan, said that Russia can sell a concession over the Armenian part to a third friendly party in order to avoid such problems with implementation of the Trumbo route. So what are your assessments, Russia's assessments? Is there any consideration of changing this position? Strange statements, awkward statements. Russia has consistently advocated deblocking of all regional transport, economic communications and infrastructure. And Russia has done a lot of things in terms of a trilateral group under the presidency of the vice premiers of Armenia, Azerbaijan and Russia. This railroad for over 20 years is being administered by Russia, and for all this time the Russian company has not only implemented all the terms and conditions of the agreement, but invests a great deal of money to the infrastructure and the equipment, providing more jobs, and this should be considered by all those who want to make a comment on this topic. The Russian Federation does not strip off the competitiveness of Armenia. Moreover, it helps to boost competitiveness status. On the 12th of February, the Deputy Chairman Alexei Overchuk said, and that's what was said by Mr. Overchuk, and we'll stick to this policy as well. Is Interfox with us? Yes, we're here. Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. And in the follow-up of the codes, Russia has claimed on the readiness to help Cuba, and we wonder what exactly kind of help can be rendered. Is the embassy aware? The embassy stated that it's going to send oil and oil products to Cuba. Is there any understanding on the schedule of such aid? And I suggest speaking not in abstract terms, but speak the things as they are. As a result of the unilateral restrictive sanctions, the energy crisis, which led to an energy crisis in Cuba, impacted the overwhelming population in Cuba, along with the Russian tourists, and we are grateful for the Cuban authorities for their efforts, who helped to make everything to minimize the energy shortages in order to compensate and prolong the stay of Russian tourists in Cuba. The Russian Consulate General and Embassy is in permanent contact with the relevant agencies, tourist agencies, and works with all requests from our tourists that need advice, help, makes everything possible. The fuel has already been supplied for the aircraft, for tourists. So Russia makes everything possible in order to eliminate and tackle the inconveniences emerged as a result of these actions. As for the unprecedented restrictions against Cuba by the United States, this energy blockade, for many years, the Russia-Cuba interaction has consistently been developed in various areas despite the sanctions, illegitimate sanctions introduced by the US against Russia and Cuba, and we will continue to do so for the benefit of our peoples, based on our historic traditions, fraternal friendship, solidarity, and mutual assistance. And I believe that the meeting of two ministers has already started, and you know that. So the whole range of issues, I believe, will be covered, and we will brief you on the results of the Russia-Cuba talks. Thank you. Is Reiter with us? Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. We're here. And our second question on Cuba, you have just answered. Thank you very much for your answer. So we have one question about talks, US-Russia-Ukraine talks in Geneva, which have just wrapped up in Geneva. The Russian delegation included for the first time ever, it is Mr. Galuzin. No, that's not the truth. Every time the delegation headed by, following the order of our President Medinsky, our foreign deputy minister, the deputy foreign minister, has always participated in the delegations on a permanent basis. Thank you for this clarification. Maybe you have some information on the details. No, I don't have any information. Of course, this information will be publicly available by the representatives and by the delegation. Maybe a bit later we can talk about this in detail. But right now I can say that the talks has just wrapped up. So I'm not entitled to make any comments on this. So let's wait for the news from Geneva. Thank you. Is Lenta.ru with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have two questions today. The first one, on the 16th of February, the Foreign Minister of Estonia, Margus Tsahkna, said that the Republic allegedly can transfer the armed conflict to Russia. What is your opinion on this statement? To be honest, it's quite a awkward statement. So let us make a hybrid answer. Maybe he hinted that he's going to escape the first one from Estonia, maybe to Russia. I think everything is possible. There are many cases in modern history, similar cases, and I believe that such people should act rather than say. I don't know whether he was entitled with this mandate to make such statements, but this statement suggests to me as just what I've mentioned. And my second question is the statement on the Munich conference. Vladimir Zelensky said that he called Europe and US to expel Russians from the West, claiming that Russians do not respect the rules of the Western states. What is Moscow's opinion on such statements, and whether Russian tourists can face strict restrictions on behalf of Europe? But Zelensky is a Nazi person. I think it's quite logic for him to make such statements. And I think that this is a man without any nationality. And he hasn't said that he belongs to any ethnicity, while we see that he does not mind saying that he does not care about how many victims will be as a result of this war. And that's not the first example. That's not the first statement of Zelensky. Statement against our citizens and its own citizens. 2021, long before the special military operation, Zelensky publicly called the Russian people and the Russian-speaking population as as just creatures who, for the sake of the future, and I quote, for the future of their grandchildren, should go away to Russia. That's senseless. It's unprecedented. For example, if he comes to Germany and voices out this statement, I think that's awkward. Likewise, the statements with regard to migrants who violate all stripes of rules, the Germans and the West incorporated so many rules that the person can say nothing and can escape justice, despite the fact that he got to the country illegally and, by the way, while committing a crime. So it would be awkward if he delivers such a statement, for example, in Germany. But he does so at the Munich conference, and no one for all these years has never made a comment on this statement, that this Nazi logic should be left away. Well, I don't care why he says so. This is the fact. Zelensky is perceived by the world as a Nazi collaborator, as a Nazi. I don't know the reasons why he became a Nazi, but I think that's the case for the psychologist to study. He's a Nazi who is building his ideology on the Nazi slogans He has long been imposing the Nazi ideology to his own population and around the world. And I think he is not perceived seriously right now. So let's move on. If you don't have any questions, we'll switch to another question. Is news.
Добрый день.
Да, добрый день.
Мария.
Hello, Madam Zakharova. Yes, hello. How would you comment on the recently appeared investigations in French media space about the participation of French neo-Nazi formations supporting the Ukrainian armed forces? So such an investigation, it appeared in a Western media outlet. It's just symbolic. We have made repetitive statements on that, but it's just became impossible for themselves to ignore. And their own militants, mercenaries, maybe journalists who visited one outlet, Street Press, it's an online media outlet, reported that there is allegedly a French unit in Ukraine named the Pirate Region. It's part of Revanche Battalion, formed by neo-Nazi tradition and order organization. It includes former French servicemen from the 13th Battalion of Alpine Chasseurs, various units of the Foreign Legion. They do not hide their neo-Nazi beliefs, show off their tattoos and patches depicting swastikas. They compare themselves to the executioners of the Einsatzgruppen during the Second World War. And I would like to draw your attention that this investigation was carried out by the French journalists. It's like a BBC material and not some Russian media outlet, not by some friendly regime country, but it's French journalists. So the European public that has been fed with fakes and propaganda for all those years, all those decades, Russophobic propaganda, is not a sensation for us. We know that. We talk about that literally every day on all the platforms. The participants of neo-Nazi supporting the Ukrainian armed forces is one of the peculiarities of the Ukrainian conflict. In 2014, we have reminded about that today and have done that during last previous briefing. It's neo-Nazi regime, Nazi in essence. It's about Ukrainian Nazi collaborators, Hitlerites. They're just birds of prey attracted. This conflict attracts Nazi elements from all over the world. The desire to protect the population of Novorossiya from the Nazism that has emerged. Also in the format of 80-year-old configuration, now in this Ukrainian image. That's the reason of conducting the special military operation. One point that could have surprised us is the reaction, just rather lack of reaction by the French authorities. So they care about some frogs in the context of Navalny, as you understand. But when it's about publishing the materials of their own journalists with such investigations, they just forget immediately about human rights, about tolerance, about humanity, and the pillars of their own country. The Defense Ministry, I have studied those reports. They provide a link to Defense Ministry and the Ministry of Interior of France. They have not paid much attention to such information, and former French servicemen participating, maybe not former even, participating in hostilities in Ukraine, and they went there for personal, not ideological reasons. So this ideology, this philosophy, it will cover everything. Westerners, including the French, just divide terrorists and extremists into allegedly good and moderate, and divide them into allegedly bad. It's us and them. We have witnessed that in Syria, Libya, Kosovo, the Sahel. Now we see this in Ukraine as well. So what will Paris do with those who came to Ukraine with French passports? They have received neo-Nazi experience there, and they will come back to their motherland. Maybe they hope that Russia will resolve their future problem issue, but then they will need to be honest about it. It's a one-way ticket, allowing their citizens to participate in this conflict, supporting not only the Ukrainian armed forces, but Nazi battalions, obviously neo-Nazis. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Anadolu with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. We have two questions today. The first one is about Cuba. Victor Coronelli, a Russian ambassador in Cuba, said that he's serious about the threat of invasion by the US. How does Russia assess Cuba's defensive capabilities and the likelihood of such an attack? I think Sergei Lavrov, Russian Foreign Ministry, during his introductory statement, just spoke about that in detail. He spoke a lot, and I think it would be excessive to make additional comments. I just saw the newsreel and saw the comments of the minister. Okay, the second question is about Canada. Russian Ambassador Oleg Stepanov said that in case of confiscation of Russian diplomatic property in Canada, Moscow will be forced to sever diplomatic ties. What factors led to this situation, in your opinion? What will be the consequences? Actually, we know about the radicals and radical political figures in Canada. They offer different measures to influence us, maybe somehow to confiscate diplomatic property, to close foreign institutions. There are some people who want just to disrupt totally contacts between our countries. But we need to understand that this escalation will lead to further destructive scenario and irreversible consequences. So spoiled bilateral relations, much spoiled by Canadians. It's their fault. So it's will be symmetrical reaction, similar, or it can be asymmetrical, taking into account the steps, the actions that will be taken by Canada against our country. Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, another law I have answered is Kyoto Tsusin with us, so it's just surprising our Japanese journalists with us. Yes, we are from Japan. Hello, Madam Zakharova. I have two questions. The first one is about Anchorage. We have heard recently a lot about the spirit of Anchorage or Anchorage formula. It's not only by your minister, but your deputy minister and the presidential press secretary. They have used this term, but if you had joined us at the briefings, you would have known that it's not only the presidential press secretary, but also, even as you have said, the Foreign Ministry press secretary applies this term. It's also used by foreign representatives. It's used by everyone. So I think this term is very important in the process of settlement in Ukraine. And I think you have provided details on this term, but I would ask you to provide some detail. What is encourage spirit and encourage formula? That's my first question. Thank you. So let us try. I think all the state figures mentioned by you and official representatives have repeatedly mentioned that, but I will try to do that once again. The spirit. It's in this case formula, atmosphere, understanding. Anchorage is a place in Alaska. And to take them together, it's the understandings that have been reached during the Russian-American summit in Alaska. That's what it is. The Russian delegation that is now in the process of negotiations in Geneva, and those negotiations have just ended, as I see according to the reports, had an instruction to act within the framework of this understanding, those aspects fixed by the sides. You can say agreements. Yes, maybe the understanding reached during the Russian-American summit in Alaska. That's it. Thank you. Thank you. My second question, if you allow me, is about India. US President Donald Trump has recently said that Indian government has decided not to purchase Russian crude oil, and during the Munich conference, Marco Rubio has made similar statements as well. But as I understand, the Indian side has confirmed that. So what's the vision of Russia of this situation, and the US statements by the president and others? Is it just confirming confirmation of the real situation? If you had participated in the briefings on the 4th of February, I have replied to a similar question during the briefing, and our position is unchanged. I would like to remind you that the position, the right of the US to command independent states with whom they should trade, it's not applicable. And this position has been stated in context with Russian colleagues and publicly. And the issues of foreign economic cooperation with New Delhi, it was official statements by India, guided by national interests, sovereign decisions based on commercial expediency. And I think we have no basis to believe that Russia has revised its approach. India has revised the approach. And it's about maintaining stability in the international energy market, and we're ready to continue close cooperation with our partners and friends in India. Thank you very much. And I think is there an antonym to the word encourage spirit? Based on the context of today's briefing, maybe the antonym it could be Munich spirit. But the encourage spirit needs to be preserved, but the Munich spirit, it needs some wind, really. So just visit our briefings more often, Apart from India, we have some topics in Russian-Japanese relations. Maybe they will also be of interest to you sometime. Is El Mayadin with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. Of course, we are with you every time. In contrast with the Japanese media outlet, how acceptable is the Peace Council on Gaza for Russia? Taking into account it does not include the Palestinian state representatives. So what's the policy of Russia, and does it not contradict the efforts? So let me check, maybe we have done that already. 1 second, please. Literally, just a moment. Maybe it has been published already, or we will publish it as soon as possible. The interview, maybe a fragment of an interview of Foreign Minister Lavrov to Al Arabiya channel, where he explained in detail the topic mentioned by you, the Peace Council and the Middle East situation in general, and then we will publish this interview entirely. So it will soon be done on the ministry website. Now let me just clarify one more time with my colleagues whether it has been published already or not. And for now, as I am clarifying, I would like to highlight that the leadership of the country, taking into account the invitation received by a Russian president to join the council, our position on this issue is being developed, taking into account the interests of our closest partners in the Middle East and representatives of the Arab Muslim world. At their request, Russia did not interfere with the adoption of the UN Security Council Resolution 2803, which expresses support for a comprehensive plan for Gaza. We identified a number of bottlenecks in this issue, like issues that could cause problems in this document. And regarding Russia's position on the creation of a Palestinian state in accordance with the two-state principle for resolving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, it remains consistent and unchanged. So the interview to Al Arabiya will be published at 10 p.m. Moscow time. There will be detailed replies, and this interview is Ruda with us. Thank you.
I'm with you. Thanks a lot for the opportunity. I am Niaz Mustafa from Rudao, and I have 3 questions. My first question is that the commander of Syrian Democratic Forces said the naming is not important. We want the Kurdish areas in Syria to be managed and administered by Kurds. What's Russia's position or stance on this call?
Мы внимательно следим.
Actually, we have followed in detail these developments in northeastern Syria. We have provided comments on the 30th of January. We are convinced that the path to long-term stabilization in Trans-Euphrates lies through broad dialogue, strengthening and national unity and harmony, taking into account all ethnic and religious groups in Syrian society, including, of course, the Kurds. And at the same time, we believe that the sovereignty should be respected, the sovereignty of the Syrian Arab Republic and its territorial integrity.
Fire in Syria, especially about the Kurdish areas, but there are some cities still on siege, and there's still blockade on them. Have you discussed, and the humanitarian situation in these cities are not good. Have you discussed about this siege and blockade on Kurdish cities in Syria?
Вы знаете, мы надеемся, что...
You know, we hope that the implementation of the agreements reached on a ceasefire and reintegration of the northeastern space will be completed and all outstanding issues be settled. That would settle the situation in the Trans-Euphratean region, and on the 12th of February became a milestone in the statement of the mass media on the events in northeast Syria, which reflects the consolidated position of the UN Security Council members. It supports the agreements. And there is also an idea there that this implementation would advance the protection of civilians and unimpeded access of humanitarian cargo and the post-conflict restoration of Syria.
Related to the negotiations between Iran and US. US officials have been talking about a possible strike on Iran if Tehran does not accept the deal that Washington wants. Does Russia believe there could be a strike, or does it view the mention of a possible strike as a threat to pressure Iran into agreeing to their terms and conditions?
Вы знаете,
I don't see any sense to speak about this, to speak about our beliefs and our hopes. I would like to say what is clear, that blackmailing is not conducive to negotiations, and Russia is persuaded that in order to find a mutually beneficial solution on the Iranian issue requires equal, respectful dialogue, and there is no reasonable alternative to this dialogue. We are ready to promote the consistent settlement and implementation of the agreements, and we hope that the reasoned sense, the common sense, shall prevail, and Iran won't be engaged into a new military venture with far-reaching consequences.
спасибо вам. С нами ли...
Is author E with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Ruslan Pankratov. I have two questions today. What is the assessment of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as to the statement of the Munich participants that Russia remains the principal threat of the Euro-Atlantic security? And I just got an idea that the traditional New Year of China is the principal celebration, and I thought that the Chinese journalist can... And once I just remembered that there are holidays in China, and we congratulate our colleagues from China and our friends from China, and we congratulate all those who celebrate the New Year festivities, the Chinese New Year festivities. I'm sorry. Yes, that was worth. It was just a kind of a secondary reflections. The most wanted tickets inside China and the most tourist attraction in China is happening in the context of the New Year, because everyone has to go home and celebrate the festivities in the family. This is a strong tradition, and everyone, as we see, goes home to visit their families and having a rest. I am so sorry for this. Yes, let us return to our briefing. I had two questions. What is the assessment of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as to the statements of the Munich participants that Russia remains the principal threat to the Euro-Atlantic security, end of quote. And is there any attempt to deliberately ignore any talks? Previously, we've mentioned that they are scared of such and they are being obsessed by some kind of phobia. And we've also added that that's the problem of their own. But here, I think that we should add that this phobia makes them earn money. They build such financial schemes based on these ideologies. As for the Munich conference, we've talked a lot about this today. It has stopped being a platform for international debates to prevent conflicts. This is not a panel discussion at the regional or global level. This is all this frenzy, accusations, flagrant narrative, irresponsible statements. This is detachment from reality and marginalization. In the mid of this well-known and popular platform, it even cannot be called a Middle East market, which means happiness for all. And here we see just a kind of some criminal group, because there are, why just a part of the group? Because there are some countries who have grains of reason and try to explain what's going on, what's playing out in the world. But unfortunately, this assertive world minority is seeking for one thing: to form the illusion of the transatlantic unity and wide support of the West. Right now, this ideology has collapsed as well, and there are internal quarrels, because they cannot hide away their internal quarrels. Over the weekend, in the past weekend, they remembered the renaissance of the partnership with the United States, and while Americans called and claimed that they should develop their own expertise. I think it's a kind of a psychological competition and theater. When everyone was competing in Russophobia narratives, instead of finding a way out of this situation, the statements of top officials of Europe reaffirmed once again an assertive anti-Russia policy based on the Nazi ideology. Just listen their statements, read them. Apart from a strategic defeat and damage they are seeking to inflict to Russia, no fresh idea, no reasonable idea was voiced as for the outlines of the security on the European part of the continent, or on the European continent as a whole, or on the European continent, which includes Russia. Such a mixture of voices and sounds. And I think even 5 or 7 years ago, it was much better. Of course, we've highlighted that the mini conference was deteriorating, and we were right by saying so. Previously, they had some reasons, and I remember how Mr. Poroshenko, the former president of Ukraine, went to Munich to sell passports, and right now they're just mocking at the Navalny topic and case. They're mocking at their agents and at everything. It has nothing to do about true reasons. It's just mocking of the people over the people who believe them. And it's a kind of a show and a competition on the worst name of the opponent. I've heard that Mr. Rutte, and I've seen how he called Russia such as the escargot, or naming some, providing some other titles for Russia. Of course, we could have done the same, but I think we should leave them alone there, on this bottom. Yes, this was a kind of manifestation of transatlantic gathering of the stupidity, and I'm talking about Madame Callas. So instead of admitting the truth that their architecture had failed, and trying to find the next step and the ideology that would underpin this path, they just remembered their old assumptions, juggling them all around, resorting to all anti-Russia rhetoric. Do you have any other questions? Yes, as for the topic of psychiatrists, I just got an idea why these events do not receive any comments by the health ministry of Russia. Please join our briefing. We need your expert opinion, because I don't have such terms. Because when people act like children and call this as a conference and name as a conference, a security conference, and I think that psychiatrists should join our briefing for giving an adequate assessment. What is the ministry's attitude towards the blocking of the media outlets in the Baltic states under pretext of fighting the spread of misinformation? I believe that on the one hand that this is a manifestation of double standards and disrespect for the principles of democracy. And the second point, it can be viewed as a dysfunction of many international organizations and NGOs that protect journalists and the freedom of speech. We see that there is no response to killings of journalists, to the discrimination of speech, to the banning of channels. But this persecution on the basis of the language This is all about human rights and humanitarian area. The West does not make any comments on this point. We are living in a world which bets on the practical side and on practical efforts. So we cannot hope for such statements, but they made it otherwise. I'm against the term of double standards because it was back then, it was relevant. Right now, it's about complicity in the persecution against the Russian journalists, because in this case, amid this deafness, this means that they are involved in these criminal activities. And I think I refer to the OC institutions. We've released a lot of reports and evidences. And right now, my colleagues draft a huge document on our journalists killed or fallen victims in Kiev, on how many people are on the so-called lists of those to be eliminated. And we will once again draft such lists, but unfortunately I understand and I can predict their response. Thank you very much. And I congratulate you with the Chinese New Year. And I wish you the same. And I wish my congratulations with the upcoming 23rd of February. Is Ambassador live with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Yes, good afternoon. Посольская жизнь. I have 3 questions today. The mass media journalists believe that Russia is among the principal states that would outline the global policy for the near future, along with the United States, China, and other major actors. What strategic alliances and areas of international cooperation Russia sees as priorities to strengthen its influence in the changing global order? We don't care about policymakers. There is the term as common sense. Russia, which has its cultural identity, which occupies the large part of the continent, which has access to many seas, and has widespread logistic chains and unites continents, even several continents, which has scientific, technical, humanitarian achievements, is future-oriented while respecting the history and culture. How can this country ignore the interests of the major states? We are not like the members of the Munich conference. We respect the rights of others. And it is our reality. Tchaikovsky has been cancelled for 4 years, and then the foreign minister of Switzerland comes to Moscow as the OSCE chairman and offers the foreign music box with the Tchaikovsky music, saying that Russia is the part of Europe. And I wonder, why did you try to abolish and cancel Tchaikovsky? And I think this is a worldwide and famous musician and composer. Only a small group of some strange people who believed that because of their angry attitude and hatred towards the world, that they can damage Tchaikovsky if they cancel and throw away the ads about the concerts. So I think we need to deny and decline any references to such journalists. As for the unity, we prioritize the work with the CIS countries, work together with the CSTO, CIS, Russia Central Asia formats, and I've already mentioned this today. The CIS, of course. For a more broader issue, this is the SCO, the Russia-China connection tie, which become one of the stabilizing factors of the international affairs. We have forged multifaceted ties with India over the past years. We have established an overwhelming strategic partnership with North Korea and Iran. As for the Middle and East Asian states, we deepen our contacts between Russia and the Persian Gulf. We prepare the first Russia-Arab summit. We launched regular meetings at the level of foreign ministers in the format Russia-Africa. We increased development with the African Union and cooperation with it. We plan to institutionalize the relations with Africa, with ECOWAS. We strengthen our ties with the key partners from Latin America and of the Caribbean basin. Russia is an observer state in a number of regional organizations of the Latin Association and of the Caribbean states and the American integration system. We elaborate the possibilities to restore dialogue with the Latin America and the Caribbean states. We strengthen contacts with the Caribbean and Ant community. We prioritize interaction with the Global South in the framework of ASEAN-centric mechanisms of new types such as BRICS and SCO.
It's very important for us to put efforts into financial economic mechanism, their protection, production and logistics chains, transport corridors. We support efforts to counter unilateral sanctions undertaken within the group of friends in defense of the UN Charter, BRICS, the SCO and other fora, anti-colonial areas are also of priority, and taking into account Eurasia, its strategic objective is to implement Russian initiatives to establish the greater Eurasian partnership. So my second question, in Azerbaijani side, Azerbaijani prisons, there are 11 Russian citizens. What efforts does Russia take to free them? And what steps does the foreign ministry plan to return them to their motherland? So if you want, I will precise about the exact number of people who are in prisons there in Azerbaijan. But I think you mean particular people, not everyone. We regularly, by our embassy in Baku, by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we comment on this issue. We are in close contact with themselves directly and with their relatives. Another consular access to the Baku pre-trial detention facility was granted on the 30th of December 2025, as we have repeatedly noted. The speedy release of those Russian citizens and their return home is our absolute priority. We regularly raise this issue in bilateral contacts, and such liberation by Baku would be an important step in strengthening good neighborly relations between our country. So I would like to highlight this one of our priorities of our ministry. So my third question, does the Russian Foreign Ministry consider the delivery of a note of protest in connection with the statements by Parliament member Konstantin Zatulin justified? And what steps is Moscow prepared to take to somehow ease the situation and restore constructive dialogue with Azerbaijan? So yes, it was about negotiations, about phone calls. Our ministry and other agencies, officials, it was not just solemn events, but negotiations process. We have reported on each of those, and the relevant ministries have also reported about the first part of your question. I will clarify and we will report. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Dost channel with us? Yes, hello. I would like to continue the issue of the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. Marco Rubio said that Washington has no basis to distrust the conclusions of the European regarding the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. He was poisoned with dart frog poison, phytidine. You know about that. Statements by 5 European countries. So does the statement by American Secretary of State change violation here? I would like to begin with the first part of the question, where there has been some violation here, and maybe you have some materials that have testified about analysis result, maybe some laboratory data on official documents with stamps, with signatures, how you have repeatedly addressed how you have contacted doctors, did some blood tests and so on. There are also verified papers. No, I don't have that. I do not represent the Russian state. As far as I remember, Russia is the OPCW member, and on the OPCW website there are materials about the poisoning of Alexei Navalny, and Russia could request those materials. Yes, we have requested, but maybe you have not listened to our briefing from the beginning. I have enumerated how many requests we have sent. It was tens of requests with one question, just one question. So it was OPCW special conclusions. But you have asked about some fake materials, some violations. But you can talk about that only when you say that you have been provided a document. For example, you are given a passport, you go to some official agency, and they say your passport is fake. How can we say about fake documents if we have no documents at all here? When there were political statements by the current 5 states, before that a number of states, and OPCW Technical Secretariat, they were purely political. We tell every time what you ask about, but just tell, let us clarify. Let me just finish my statement, please. I will be in dialogue with you until you tell me that's it. I promise you that. But for me to be able to answer you, please do not interrupt me. So we have not received, and I tell that every month, so we have not received any documents at all about some formula of the substance and the methodology applied in the identification of the relevant, as they state, poison, substance, and so on. There's nothing of the kind. Nothing. And the second question, maybe let us see if we had remained inactive, had not done anything, your indignation would have been justified, and I would have supported that, but you have sent tens of official documents, not diplomatic. The diplomatic documents were accompanying. Those were official requests by law enforcement or officials. That happens. Every year some events happen, unfortunately. Some of them are qualified as crimes, attempts to commit crimes, and if those events are of transborder nature, committed in one country in relation to citizens of other country, law enforcement authorities exchange this information. It's on a yearly basis, annually done. Why this, in this case, our country has not been provided anything? It's because they provide those fake substances, fake data. Because as soon as they provide the documents, there will be substantive work carried out. They do not want that. We will need just to provide, to investigate. We will need to provide clarifications. And like Theresa May, she went to the parliament. She said it was done by Russia, as it has done that before, and Russia can do that now. That was it. Even in Scotland, yeah, there was just one press conference regarding Skripal. The same thing is about Navalny. According to their point of view, when was that done? What laboratories made such conclusions? How has this been identified? That needs to be done for a start. So now your precise questions, additional questions. Yes, if you have asked, I have listened to the end. So what about the investigation by Alexei Navalny himself after poisoning and his rehabilitation with the exact names of officials who have poisoned him? And moreover, he has reached his poisoner by phone that was published and that was explained in detail by Navalny team. So after he said that his mother is a consul, it just became clear for me. My mother is an arts critic, so that's my relationship to that. It's not just some offenses by him. So my mother is a scholar. She studies art. So she has never been some consul, but he has presented my mother as a consul. So regarding Marco Rubio, does that change anything in our relationship, in our attitude? No. So all those accusations against Russia are in that highly likely manner. It's ordinary manner. There are no specific data. There is no specific data there. It's some proclamation based on some unclear things. It's just in order to make at the Munich conference and somehow to switch the agenda from Epstein files, and mostly it was for the Munich conference. So just let me one more additional question. Yes, I will reply to that. We do not hope, we do not ask, we just demand, we request to provide specific data on this issue. It was supported by the notes of our embassy in Germany and in particular in London on the Skripal case to their law enforcement officers, any law enforcement bodies that are ready to provide the facts and the opinion of the third countries regarding the fake accusations of our country cannot influence our position on this issue. They are obliged to provide the data. Frogs, something like that. It's about ducks, and who was there at the initial stage? Cats. It's similar to that. So you can ask a question. Yes, my last question to clarify. You have just gone deep into the French story. So it was the funeral of Navalny. His fortune, it's of concern to millions of people in Russia and all over the world. So what happened to Alexei Navalny? So what happened to him in 2020? in Omsk, he was in hospital. And what happened 2 years ago? Thank you very much. If you now personally or from your media outlet have said that I have no other citizenship because your colleagues, they have tried to provide some fake statements about me and my family. I have never heard that. So what happened to him? It's a question for law enforcement authorities. Those who just transported him, who accompanied his life, and what happened there? What has happened? It's a question to them. But actually, he became ill on the territory of Russia. And on the territory of Germany, was everything okay with him? What did they do with him there? No one knows them. Actually, he became ill when he was in Siberia. We have the same questions to that side. Regarding the Russian part of criminal cases, it's the scope, the responsibility of law enforcement authorities. I can address them and provide you the part of information they have on your question, and I will do that. But questions to those who just directly were his political curators or friend, you name it, or his colleagues from that side, you have some proof that Alexei Navalny has some curators on the West? I have never seen that. And the person, as they said, was poisoned in Berlin, as they said in Berlin, poisoned by chemical weapons. The German chancellor could visit him in his hospital chamber. Yes, for any person who would have found himself in such a situation, he would have been visited. But for the German chancellor to visit a person in the hospital chamber after poisoning by chemical weapons, it would have been ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But to invent stories that he had not been curated, not supported by some European political figures, because that support was done. It was done in all the areas. And where are the documents that testify about that support? Documents, yes, documents, the proof. I beg your pardon. So you require documents, formulas, proof? So have you never heard statements by presidents, NATO countries, foreign ministers, supporting the actions by Navalny? Have you never seen that? Maybe you do not follow this issue? Because the situation with the Ukrainian crisis, journalists are killed. Unfortunately, sadly, regularly. So please let me make the statement. So I have never heard anyone from NATO countries, prime ministers or presidents expressing condolences, although those people for many years have devoted themselves to journalist activities. It's a big story, like there is the Alley of Angels, because children were killed, and British, French officials, ministers have not visited them, not once. I know how many of our compatriots get into trouble in their countries. I have never seen any similar support provided to them. What are you talking about? So when Moscow makes statements, some statements expressing sympathy to Viktor Orban, Does it mean that Moscow sponsors Viktor Orban, and Viktor Orban is the Kremlin agent in Europe? Moscow only makes statement with regard to Viktor Orban only when he is accused of and now offended with regard to his relationship to the Russian Federation, taking into account his status and his post. When it's about NATO internal disputes, who should allocate which sum to someone? It's their problems. We do not interfere in that. But with regard to Viktor Orban, his relations is as the head of the country. He is offended. And I would remind you those statements by Zelensky, they concern our history. Maybe you have not seen that quotation, but he has built a bridge to our relations with Hungary. And then we comment that. But I have never thought about common statements with someone or from some communities with regard to Viktor Orban. So Viktor Orban, he has not been poisoned and he is the prime minister. So what's the interrelation here? Because you mentioned with indignation that Angela Merkel, former German chancellor, visited Alexei Navalny. Yes, actually I have cited it as an example. Yes, I have heard your position. And Orban has been, he's not harmed here in the West, but Fico, he has been harmed. I do not understand your logics.
That I would like to say that the visit of Mr. Navalny by Angela Merkel, it doesn't make any proofs or evidence. Just by the way, just in terms of your interest on this topic, please just read on how people are being treated in terms of in health institutions, people who were poisoned. Just learn what protective measures are being used for the medical personnel when they deal and treat the patient poisoned with chemical weapons. Of course, I will learn about this, and maybe you will learn more about the poisoning of Mr. Navalny in 2020. And I invite you to join our briefings next time. Is Rosmedia with us? Yes, I am correct. I'm sorry. Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Good afternoon, colleagues. Madam Zakharova, there is a perception that the current activity of the current European capitals show that they are trying and making every effort in order to stay on the international arena. So it seems that Europe is trying to preserve its place by trying to defer Russia. Is Moscow ready for talks with the European states, and don't you think that the current circumstances allows Russia to impose their opinion? And yes, thank you very much. Yes, you have a lot of questions. We always welcome you. We always welcome any questions. If you don't mind, you can put these questions, but you'd better make them as separate questions. I'm wondering, who wants to be at the table? Is it the European Union? Europe. So first and foremost, I always call that we should hesitate that from naming EU as Europe. But we should keep in mind What place do they want to occupy at the table? What table? They've disrupted all the tables. They denounced negotiations. They frauded. They did a lot of things. In order to occupy their place at the table. But first and foremost, a man should behave well and should confirm the status of a respected person, and they disrupted their international standing. And first, they should restore their international stance and standing in international relations as partners, or at least those with whom we can at least talk just briefly, not at the table of negotiations, but even in this way and in this sense, they spread lies. So, in terms of energy, this is a sophisticated and tricky issue. The West damaged their own interests and their own economy by abandoning the energy cooperation with Russia, which had been elaborated for many decades. First with the Soviet Union, then with Russia, and they declined and undermined this negotiation table back then, even by showing their reluctance to allow access to investigations of the Nord Stream blowouts. So Russia, and I think the whole civilized world, is interested in a robust and long-standing settlement of the conflict based on the elimination of the root causes. I don't want to even speculate about the truth, but right now I see that Mr. Medinsky said, following the talks in Geneva, and this is more relevant right now, but I can say that any manipulations that we saw in summer 2025 with some truces and pauses, with NATO's aspirations to give a respite to the Kiev regime and to rearm it, all these efforts will be perceived on the basis of common sense and the situation on the ground, the situation of complete mistrust to the Western assertive world. By the way, after the Russia-America summit in Alaska in August 2025, the US president said that the best way is to conclude a direct deal, not just a ceasefire, because such agreements cannot be time-tested. But unfortunately, Kiev has not perceived this message. And I think right now we are waiting for the outcomes of the talks in Geneva. Yes, thank you very much. If we don't have any further questions, then goodbye. Thank you very much for your attention and see you soon. I wish you every best and I congratulate you with all